TCU needs to depend on their young defensive linemen and not a couple of guys returning from injury in 2025.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. I've been covering TCU athletics for the past 12 years. We're brought to you by FanDuel. Remember, new customers, you make one $5 bet. You win that bet, you get up to $150 in bonus bets. Try it today on the FanDuel app or at FanDuel.com. We're continuing our series. We're almost over. I'm going position by position. Yes or no? Does TCU need to pursue more players in the spring transfer portal window? Today, we're talking about defensive line. If you missed Friday's episode, I'm separating the edge rushers, the stud linebackers. That's their own position group. And this is interior defensive linemen that we're focusing on today. The short answer is no. I don't think TCU needs to focus on bringing in another player in the transfer portal because they sort of addressed it in the fall. They brought in 2 JUCO players. But also, I think for the first time since Sonny Dykes took over, there's some legitimate depth on the defensive line, potentially. But the main takeaway I have for you when we break down what are we looking at from a defensive line perspective this upcoming season, there's 2 players that hopefully will be returning this upcoming season. And they're guys that made big impacts in 2023. It was not a great year for TCU overall, 5-7, right? Joe Gillespie gets canned. But these young defensive linemen made plays, and they showed a lot of promise. One was Paul Oyewale, who ended up with 3 sacks, 5 tackles for loss. And Paul just looks the part. Like, the optimism there is well-founded. He ends up last season starting off on the injured list with just a lower body injury is what they called it. Okay, he missed Stanford. He's going to miss Long Island because that's the FCS game. But week after week, still no news. And then before the Utah game, news comes out that he's going to end up sitting out the rest of the year, has to get surgery done. So he's coming back from surgery. And I feel like as fans, we make this mistake sometimes. We always think success is just linear, right? And I don't think that's a bad expectation to have. But if somebody makes some plays as a freshman, you think, oh, well, they're just going to clean up as a sophomore. They'll continue to get better. They're going to continue to put on weight. They'll get more used to whatever scheme they're running. And logic would just tell you that they're going to be a better football player. They're going to be more productive. That's not always the case. For Paul, coming off an injury, dealing with an Achilles injury, which is always tricky and always a tough thing to bounce back from, I'm not sure that he's going to be ready to step in and be the dominant force that we expected him to be if he would have been healthy all offseason and come in as a sophomore and played right away. There's also the added component of learning a new defense. Now, he was in the meeting rooms. He was on campus. He was there with Andy Avalos last year. So he got some mental reps. But it's different putting it into practice on the field. And while defensive line, I mean, a lot of the fundamentals are the same, there still might be a learning curve there as well. The good news is, I don't think they need Paul to be a game wrecker immediately. Now, if he does that, that's amazing. And hats off to him, and we'll gladly welcome it, right? But because of some of the players they brought in, and because of the young guys that had to step up last year, in some cases as freshmen, and made things happen, there is hope that, hey, maybe if you can bring him along slowly and he can come in with the expectation of, we want you to be a force, but you don't have to be the dude every single snap, that could be a good thing. Another player that was out all of last year with injury, Michael Ibukun Okeode. 5.5 tackles for loss 2 years ago, 17 stops total. And again, in similar fashion to Paul, he looks the part. He looks like a big-time defensive lineman. But for Michael, same sort of situation. Coming off of an injury, dealing with learning a new defense, having some different responsibilities, that's going to be a tough step up. So you might say, well, why are you telling us? Why are you saying that we don't need to go get someone in the portal? Because you've just laid out 2 guys that we want to make an impact or expect to make an impact, and you're saying, hey, let's pump the brakes and reset expectations. Well, here's the reason why. In the fall, TCU did a pretty good job, or the winter portal window. TCU did a good job of bringing in some guys who I think are going to make a difference. Ansel Denbu, who's from Aledo, but he played his first couple of years at Wazoo. He had 6 sacks last year and made some great plays in the Pac-12. Saying that sounds kind of silly because it's really the Pac-2, but you know what I mean. He was playing college football at a high level, had 6 sacks, is going to come in and be ready to go right away. They also got 2 JUCO transfers that come in with good reviews. So Perry Cole is more of your prototypical 300-pound, big interior defensive tackle. He played at Trinity Valley Community College for a couple of years, was a great player there. And then Kelton Mickle has a little bit more flex. Like, he played inside, but you also saw him playing at defensive end. He was one of the top 10 rated JUCO players in the country. Jones College in Mississippi is where he played his junior college ball. And he's another guy that they are expecting to come in and to be able to play right away. So you have those dudes. You also have some young returning players who are coming off really good seasons. Now you're losing Akeem Ajibulabe, who ended up being a force for them, coming over from Houston. You're losing Nana Ofasa-Mensah from Notre Dame, who started every game last year. But I think you have the pieces to fill in the gaps. So Travis Jackson played every game last season. Had 20 tackles, 14 solo tackles, and had a sack in the Oklahoma State game. I believe he had an interception in the Oklahoma State game. As the year went on, you slowly started to see him make more and more of an impact. Really, even going back to the Long Island game. I think he had 3 tackles in that ball game. So he's got an entire year under his belt. And honestly, like, his numbers, not from a sack standpoint, but from a tackle standpoint, are pretty similar to what Paul did in his freshman year. And Travis is healthy. He's going to be ready to go. He's going to be ready to step up and play once again and continue to slide into his role as a force on the defensive line. And then Marcus Deal, maybe their best defensive lineman last year by the end of the season. I mean, the numbers, 5.5 tackles for loss, 21 tackles on the year. And that's with missing a couple of games. Had an injury before the Baylor game, missed Baylor and Oklahoma State, I believe. And I think the coolest thing about Marcus, like, you saw it consistently through the season. You saw him make plays against Stanford in week 1. You saw him make plays against Cincinnati in the New Mexico Bowl. But his best games from a numbers standpoint against Cincy, against Louisiana in the New Mexico Bowl. So another guy that got better as the year went on and is going to be ready to go right away. So you've got a good mix of dudes that you feel like you can rotate right here, right now. And then there's also some young players who haven't really played yet. But if one of them, if the light clicks on, then it could be a big boost for the depth of this defensive line. So Sterling Brooks, North Crowley product, big interior defensive lineman. Tristan Johnson, another name to know. Didn't play last year, but made a lot of plays in high school and redshirted last season. So should have a good feel for what's going on. Zach Chapman, second team freshman All-American according to The Athletic. He ended up with 24 tackles and 3 sacks. And again, a guy that played pretty much every game. Chapman, Deal, Jackson. These are all guys that were thrown in the fire last year and held their own really well. And so now they can step up and be an even bigger force coming into this season. Also, Connor Lindgren, who's dealt with some injuries through his career, but he played in 8 games, had some tackles, had a good game against Utah, like showed up on tape there, showed up on tape in the Baylor game. He had to because of the injuries they had. So another rotational piece. The good news for this team, one, I don't think they need to go get somebody in the portal. But for these players that are coming back from some pretty significant injuries, you want them to be great. And I'm not going to put restrictions on them, but I think it's fair to say you're probably in a situation where you're dealing with trying to bounce back from an injury, trying to get acclimated to a new defense, a lot of transitions there. So you have to reset expectations somewhat. But the great thing is you have players that can step up and take some of the pressure off those guys to make plays right away. And I think this defensive staff and this coaching staff as a whole have done a really good job prioritizing the trenches on the defensive line, making it an area where they want athleticism, power, dudes who can play, and they've done it in the portal. They've done it in the high school ranks. So this is a year where hopefully the light clicks on and everything comes together in a big way. When we come back, 1 step forward and 2 steps back. TCU basketball takes a tough loss on the road on Saturday, but the women, they get a big win against West Virginia. We'll talk about it here on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. PrizePicks. You need to download the app today. Have you ever thought to yourself, like, man, so this year I played fantasy football, right? And it was just a disaster. 3 weeks in, I had injuries, I had issues. Typically, I do pretty well in the season-long fantasy football slog, but not this season. It was a mess. And if you've ever wondered, like, man, my fantasy football team, my fantasy basketball team, it's a mess. Why not get involved on the daily fantasy action with PrizePicks? March basketball is here, and there's no better way to get on the action with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. It's very simple. Even I can do it. You just pick more or less on 2-player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to $1,000 times your cash. It's fast, easy, and keeps every game exciting. You can build lineups. It's quick and easy to do it. There's fast payouts. When you win, your money hits your account in as little as 15 minutes, no waiting around. They even have Taco Tuesday deals, weekly promos like Taco Tuesday, where you get discounted player projections for even more value. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's LOCKEDONCollege is the code for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Give it a try today. Well, it was a fun 4 days of hope, friends. There was a lot of celebration on Tuesday night. TCU takes down Texas Tech. It was a big win. Felt like this team had kind of turned a corner. They had made some things happen. They had given themselves an opportunity to be in the conversation for the first time this year, legitimately, when we're talking about the NCAA tournament. And then they go on the road against Cincinnati, 11 a.m. tip. They get down 13-0 almost immediately. Another slow start. And this team, they've been known for it this year. The Cincinnati game was another example of something that's been a problem for this group all year long. They just don't consistently score the basketball. And losing Frankie Collins has hurt in that regard. But even if Frankie was healthy, these scoring droughts, it's just a matter of not having players that can go get buckets on a consistent basis. Now, I love some of the dudes that have stepped up. I think Noah Reynolds has been really good for them this year. Vashawn Alette, same story. Both those guys struggled. And when they don't have their shots falling, there's just not a consistent enough presence to get the job done on a night in and night out basis. Also, defense wasn't really there. Defensive effort wasn't there all night either. And so it culminates in a 12-point loss. 75-63 was the final score. But it was never really close. There was one point. They made a run, and they cut the lead to 3. I believe Jace Posey hit a 3, and they cut it to 23-20. But quickly, Cincinnati went on a 6-0 run, and suddenly they had pushed that lead back out to 9. TCU took a timeout, and they just didn't recover. The one positive from this ball game, David Punch, 18 points. He was 8 of 13 from the field, 1 of 2 from 3. As a team, they shot 26% from 3. Vashawn Alette ended up with 13 points, but it was on 6 of 18 shooting. Noah Reynolds only had 8. He had a rough night shooting the ball. Trezarian White, who had such a good game against Texas Tech, came back to earth in a big way in this ball game and just wasn't able to make those plays again. 10 points, but 3 of 8 from the floor. And it's not a complete dagger to their tournament hopes, but it's a setback. You can still win your last 4 ball games. They play West Virginia at 8 p.m. on Tuesday night. And they beat West Virginia at home. But this is in Morgantown. I'm not super hopeful right now. But they'll have a chance to win that game and get back over 500 in conference play. And then a couple opportunities against Baylor and UCF and Colorado to close out the season. I still believe finishing 12-8 in the Big 12 will mean something and should give you a decent shot. But now you got to win your last 4 games to do it. And honestly, even though the Cincinnati game was on the road and it was a quad 1 game, that was a ball game that I kind of circled like, all right, got to get that one. And then if you drop a game to West Virginia on the road, you drop a game to Baylor at home, at least you have a slim margin of error. Now you have no margin for error. And I've said all year long, like, not that I'm excusing, missing the tournament would be super disappointing. And I'm not excusing that. But I do believe the most important thing for this particular core group of players is to figure out who the young guys are that you can build around and maintaining them in the offseason. David Punch, another outstanding game. And the scoring hasn't been there all the time, but you see the athleticism. His ability to be a rim protector is huge. His ability to rebound makes a huge difference. He's starting to get more confident taking that jump shot. That's got to be a big emphasis in the offseason, because if he can turn into more of a stretch 4, then that really opens up some possibilities offensively. But David, that's got to be the priority number 1 this offseason, like making sure he feels valued and appreciated and happy where he's at. And, man, the stat sheet didn't really show it on Saturday. Jace Posey only had 5 points, but he's so bouncy. Like, he had a couple blocks. He had 1 goaltend, but he had a couple blocks near the rim that were ridiculous. He hit a big 3 that cut the lead to 3. They couldn't capitalize on it, but he hit a 3 to make it a 1-possession game at one point. There's just a lot of potential with Jace. I see it every time he hits the floor, whether he makes a huge impact on the box score or not. And that's another guy that I actually put this out on social media during the game. I was like, if he can develop a more consistent jumper, then the sky's the limit for what he can do as a basketball player. So those 2 guys, in my mind, have to be the big priorities going into this offseason, along with Vashawn Ouellette, Ernest Uday, and Malik Diallo. But for sure, Punch and Posey, you have to make sure those guys understand where they stand with this current team and with this roster. On a better note, the TCU women, they had a big game against West Virginia. West Virginia women had 4 losses in conference play coming into this one, so they still had kind of an outside chance to make it a 3 or 4-way tie at the top of the Big 12. But Frogs handled their business. They won 71-50. They handled the West Virginia press really well. And Haley Van Lith, welcome back to scoring the basketball again. She ended up with 26 points on 8 of 12 shooting. She hit some big threes, hit a 3 at the buzzer at the end of the first quarter to push the lead out to 11. And it was a tough shot. It was off balance, gather and shoot a fadeaway, and she nailed it. She also did a good job. Like, her and Sedona had a little 2-person game going where she would throw it to Sedona at the free throw line, extended her in the high post, and then she would cut off that action. And she got a few easy layups that way, which was cool to see. Donovan Hunter has been a real bright spot lately. The way she plays defense is a tone setter. Like, the way she moves her feet defensively, stays in front of guards, makes life really tough on ball handlers. That's a big energy boost for this team. She's also playing more confidently on the offensive side of the ball. Taylor Bigby had stepped up in a big way for them for a few weeks. But now that Hunter's playing well, like, you have a good rotation, that starting lineup of Bigby and Van Lith and Hunter and then you throw Sedona in there and Agnes. That's a great starting five. And I do feel like Mark, it's been kind of subtle, but Deja Merrill got some minutes in the second quarter. Like he's done a better job of hunting for like, okay, when can I get away with giving my stars some rest? When can I give my big three a chance to catch their breath? So it's building towards Baylor plays Kansas State tonight in a huge game in Manhattan. If Baylor wins, really regardless of what happens on Wednesday, it'll be TCU and Baylor facing off for a Big 12 title. But if TCU hopefully handles their business against a Houston team that's won one game in Big 12 play, then there's a scenario where both teams have 2 losses and they're playing on Sunday evening for a Big 12 title. Baylor's playing really well. They've won 8 in a row, I believe. This will be 9 if they can get it done. K-State's a really good team. We saw that when TCU went to Manhattan. So if you want to check that out, 8 p.m. tonight. But the simplest solution, regardless of what's going on outside of TCU, is still they win their last 2 games now. They went out and they win a Big 12 title. So an opportunity for Mark Campbell's team to do that, looking forward here over the next few days. We'll come back and baseball drops 2 out of 3 in Arlington. We'll talk about that next year on Locked on Horned Frogs, your team every day. FanDuel, one of our great sponsors. If you've ever been wondering, like, man, I know so much about sports, I'm so interested in it, maybe I should dip my toe in the betting world. Well, good time to do it with FanDuel. There's always great deals going on. The NBA is in action. You can live bet on NBA games. If you want to use FanDuel's live betting feature, it keeps every moment of the game exciting. You can bet on the fourth quarter comeback, stay in the game. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets to a same-game parlay. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets. If your first $5 bet wins, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. So TCU baseball, they took on Michigan on Friday afternoon. Won that ball game, even though it was 3-1 for the majority of that game. TCU jumped on the Michigan bullpen and started driving some balls out of the ballpark. Isaac Cadena went yard, which was fun to see. So they ended up winning that game. They fall to Arkansas 2-1 on Saturday night, and then got shelled by Kansas State 10-2 on Sunday afternoon. So the K-State game, not good, but Trevor Baumler had a rough start. He's your number 3 starter. He's a true freshman. He's learning. I can reconcile with that, as TCU's probably going to have to kind of shift some things around and get some things figured out with their rotation and who's going to end up being their 3rd starter. Not giving up on Baumler, but he had a rough outing yesterday. Tommy Lepore looked good Saturday, and TCU led that game 1-0 going into the 7th inning. Lepore walked his first batter. Kirk came out there, talked to him. He ended up walking the second batter, first and second with nobody out. They were able to get a bunt and getting out. So second and third with 1 down, and Luis Rodriguez comes in and first pitch gives up a double off the wall, 2-run score, and that was the game. At least 2-1. So in that contest, like Carson Bowen had a home run robbed from him, and just some key moments where he couldn't execute. Runners in scoring position, couldn't get him across. The bigger concern to me over the 3 games was just the inability to hit. And really, like the Michigan game, they jumped all over that Michigan bullpen late, but they struggled early. Struggled all game against Arkansas, struggled against K-State, just could not get runs across the board. So that's the problem they're going to have to figure out. They play Tarleton on Tuesday. And yeah, I mean, it's a game of inches to a certain extent. If you're able to come away with a win against Arkansas, you feel better about the weekend overall. It didn't happen. It's still very early, but Carson Bowen has bounced back in a big way. Another player who had a really good freshman campaign struggled his sophomore year, and you're hoping that it really came together this season. Anthony Silva's struggling right now. Just can't find it at the plate. And, I mean, he's still really good in the field with his glove. and that talent's there, but it's just not happening when he gets in the batter's box right now. And that needs to change really quickly for this team to reach their full potential. We'll have coverage of baseball, basketball, and football all week long. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. Subscribe to the YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcast.